Hello, everybody. I'm Joe Lombardo. I'm the co-coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC. We have a administrative committee which runs the day-to-day operations of UNAC, and we're starting a series of interviews with various administrative committee members to get their views on topics of the day, and to get out some of the activities that we are involved with. Today I'm going to interview Sara Flounders. Sara Flounders has been a lifelong activist and organizer, political organizer. She is the coordinator, or the co-coordinator, I believe, of the International Action Coalition. She is a member of the UNAC Administrative Committee. She is a contributing editor to the Workers' World newspaper, and she is the author of many articles, pamphlets, and books. Sara is also one of the leaders and coordinators of a new coalition which has been formed, which UNAC is very much involved with, called the Sanctions Kill Coalition, which deals with the question of the unilateral economic sanctions that the US imposes on countries that it doesn't like or doesn't go along with the agenda of Washington and Wall Street, as a way to hurt the countries, as a way to build an opposition within the countries, and as a way to try to foster regime change. So I'm going to ask some questions of Sara, and she can tell you what the Sanctions Kill Coalition and what the sanctions movement is all about. So Sara, would you like to start with just talking about what are the sanctions, who are sanctioned, and why?
Well, yeah, I'll start with saying that the Sanctions Kill campaign is really an educational effort within the political movement in the US and internationally to focus attention on the US use of economic strangulation of countries all around the world in order to impose, corporate domination from the US. It's really a Wall Street tactic in its most vicious form, and is so secret and silent that it was not understood even within the political movement. And oftentimes, even among the best solidarity activists who were focusing. Dog almost jumped through the window at a squirrel. Where was I?
You're talking about sanctions and how it's not even understood within the movement.
Some of the most determined solidarity activists on one country talking about blockade might be completely unaware of the way in which sanctions are impacting other countries on the other side of the world. And so gathering together this information and even restating again and again that US sanctions impact 39 countries, a third of the world population, shows what an all-pervasive weapon this is, which is used right alongside the 800 military bases, the aircraft carriers, in order to attempt to impose a dying, really corrupt and breaking down capitalist system on the world as a whole. It's facing all kinds of resistance, determination of countries to struggle for their sovereignty, and it's important not to be pulled in to the created opposition movements that is given enormous coverage in the media here. So unless there's some understanding of what is going on when a country is suddenly strangled, literally stopped from importing any goods and services, everything is frozen. It is piracy, or it's like a holdup where you're robbed of cash and credit cards and everything in your cupboards all in one go, and then told to accept a completely hostile coup government. So the sanctions go hand in hand with assassination attempts, with mercenary bans, with efforts at political destabilization or what is called regime change. And it can be as intense as the years of war in Syria, which displaced a third of the population, and literally 100,000 mercenaries paid by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and other countries in an effort to overturn, impose regime change. It can be, as it is against Venezuela, where the richest country in Latin America and able to provide full, free health care, food programs, education programs for the whole country, and is now facing enormous both hyperinflation and empty shelves and lack of medicine. That 80% of the medicines that were once freely available are now completely inaccessible. Mm-hmm. So sanctions from one side of the world to the other, almost half of the countries that are sanctioned are in Africa. And for many, it's hard to even find out what on earth crime was committed in US eyes, except that, of course, it's an effort to seize the resources. And since the overthrow, the complete bombing and destruction of Libya, you have US troops operating AFRICOM throughout Africa. So the troops, the mercenaries, and the sanctions operate together. Now, the Sanctions Kill campaign is trying to highlight what this is and to address in country after country what it means in Iran with U.S. submarines, nuclear aircraft carriers, and all of that in the Persian Gulf, and surrounding Iran with bases and cutting off all of its legitimate trade, even in violation of agreements that the U.S. signed with the world that was to allow Iran to sell its oil. So that's another example.
Yeah, that's something that even startled me a little bit, to the extent that they do that the United States, when we do sanctions, some people think that it means that the U.S. doesn't trade with these countries, but it turns out that what the U.S. also does is doesn't allow anybody to trade with these countries. And, I thought that might mean mostly U.S. allies and so forth in the very beginning, but now we're seeing this incredible situation where Venezuela, which has the world's largest supply of oil, but it's very heavy oil, and it has to be mixed with other oil, and it has to be refined to be used as gasoline. It is finding that it doesn't have enough gas, and doesn't have enough gasoline, and doesn't have enough refined oil to run its country. A lot of that, I understand, is because a lot of the refineries were in the United States with Citgo, which was a Venezuelan company. But now Iran, who is also another sanctioned country, is sending oil right now to refined oil to Venezuela. And the United States says this is a violation of their unilaterally imposed sanctions, and is threatening to use military force to stop these vessels from coming to Venezuela. And this actually can lead to a military confrontation, and it shows the connection in some ways between the sanctions and the other forms of military and imperialist confrontation. So what do we do about that? How do we oppose that? And what should we be doing?
Right. That is exactly what is happening in country after country. It's really piracy on the high seas. Ships are being seized, or countries are being fined billions of dollars, and that means their money is just grabbed and held. And that can be true even for U.S. collaborators and allies. A French corporation was just, and their money was just seized, some $8 billion, because they went ahead on a signed trade deal with Iran. So the U.S. claimed. I don't even know if they did, but or you could look at a ship from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, that was simply seized in a port because the US said, well, Korea is not allowed to trade, so seize the ships. Now you could look at Yemen, another sanctioned country, completely destroyed, looted by war from Saudi Arabia, that is every step equipped militarily by the US and with diplomatic coverage. But who really enforces a naval blockade? While there's 5 Iranian ships headed toward Venezuela, there are 15 ships in Yemen's harbor that are being held back by US-Saudi naval blockade. So it is using at every form these blockades, naval blockades. You could look at Gaza, where even a fishing boat, even a small solidarity boat from another country cannot land. It's literally a blockaded area on every border and on the seas. So the sanctions are completely imposed. Certainly the sanctions on Gaza couldn't exist for a minute, and the sanctions on all of Palestine couldn't exist for a minute without US support right here of Israel, and also US legislation that stops even humanitarian projects for an orphanage or a school from going through. So this needs to be addressed in a holistic way, and at the same time, you want to really give solidarity to each one of these countries resisting. You could look at the years that Zimbabwe, just in order to distribute land to its real owners, found itself sanctioned by the US and the entire British Commonwealth for a land distribution program that had been promised to them as part of the independence. And then, of course, didn't take place and was never meant to take place by Britain or the US. Of course, they're totally partial to the white farmers, and they're all for expropriating the African farmers who this land belongs to. So that Zimbabwe is another example. And you could look everywhere. Now, some countries, Cuba, we know from day one has been under US blockade. The strictest form of sanctions, that any trade with Cuba is punished. And even the right of Cuba to receive medical supplies and PPE gear coming from China, that was literally blocked. Now, so it shows even in a COVID pandemic, what is done is how can the US make conditions worse for every country? And that comes back on the population of the whole world. If you're sanctioning a third of the world and literally denying medical equipment and supplies, then you're really impacting the entire world, because this is a globalized economy today in every sense of the way. So, and all of this is done for corporate profit. You know, the population in the US gains not at all. And it is done in a way that heightens racism around the world. So combating it in the political movement here, defending the right of countries to determine their own future, their right to self-determination and sovereignty, it's a very important role for a genuine movement in the US to play. And unless we see that and see it all linked together, because it's not well understood. There were peace groups years ago who, seeing the horror of what US wars could do, would say, well, sanctions are preferable. And the US actually imposed a number of sanctions through the UN by threatening, if this doesn't happen, then we're opening a military campaign tomorrow. You know, and so under threat of bombing, there would be complicity in the UN trying to stop another hot war. But they found, of course, that is not what was the intention at all. And the sanctions ground on for years. I think Iraq was the most incredible situation where you had Madeleine Albright saying the death of 500,000 children is worth it to the US, is worth it. That was an unforgettable quote, because 500,000 children is worth it for the US to regain control of Iraq. And so those sanctions continued and killed far more people than the war and the bombing ever did. So we really want to highlight that sanctions are the greatest killer. And this is true. The Vietnam showed this, and certainly Venezuela does today. Shows this.
It seems that it's becoming clearer and clearer to people, and I notice this in the movement too. A lot more people are talking about sanctions now. I think we kind of started that discussion in some sense.
We helped to,
but now everybody is doing it. But I think it's become more obvious during this pandemic, the way different countries have handled the pandemic and how that has affected them. And I think it's due to the kind of system, whether in the United States, where it's you can only do something to help the pandemic if it is profitable to someone, where in other countries they've put human needs ahead of that. But during this pandemic, the US has done, as you said, upped the sanctions on some countries, denied them medical equipment and denied them medicine. And we've seen another piece about the sanction that, unlike the United States, who tries to put up walls and so forth, it does not recognize borders. It only took weeks for it to first be noticed in the world and then to reach the United States, where it's running rampant and we have the highest rate of infection and death in the world. So it seems like during this period, there is becoming a better understanding of sanctions, and that might be important for the development of our movement. Do you see that, and do you see the growth of the movement now?
I think there's a much greater awareness among all of the groups that, as I say, are solidarity movements for different countries, understanding a common problem and actually listening, seeking out other allies and other countries facing these attacks. And at the same time, these countries are increasingly talking to each other and are willing to confront certainly the aid that China has given around the world in literally in the billions of dollars and an incredible amount of supplies. Every country in Africa received huge shipments of both some basic medicines and also PPE equipment and supplies, along with, of course, many, many other countries, but every country in Africa, countries throughout Asia, but also to Europe. And by the way, to the US, it was what supplied the hospitals here in New York City when you had the staff wearing literally rain ponchos and shower caps and bandanas because they had no equipment. And there they were, the frontline workers. So there is huge incompetence in the US there, and it's because this is a system based on total competition at every level. So even supply companies and testing companies and hospital systems compete with each other. And in a crisis, competing even more. Now that's kind of incredible. Now that's shown, though, something else, which is worth taking note of, that the countries that are under sanctions have had to develop intensely layers of social mobilization in order to resist the hyperinflation, the shortages, and all of that. And facing COVID-19, they are doing better than countries where there is no social mobilization. Who would have thought? I mean, you really have to see it as it's unfolded, that the US, with all of its technology and supposedly the most modern developed healthcare system in the world, doesn't have a healthcare system at all. And countries that are completely impoverished has large social mobilization networks. So when there's a shutdown, they have people's organizations that go to every home, every community, make sure everyone has basic food supplies. Everyone is doing social distancing. Everyone knows the protocols of hand washing and face masks. Now, and it makes for stunning differences. Venezuela, so much poorer now than neighboring Brazil or Colombia. Figures are far, far better in terms of COVID fatalities and even the transmission of this disease. It doesn't matter almost where you look, it's kind of stunning. Vietnam, it's incredible. And China, the most incredible example, where there was a mobilization of the entire population. And the fatalities in the US now, country a quarter the size, is about 20 times what it is in China today. So it shows that social mobilization is the best, you could say, preventative containment that is possible in a pandemic, and providing for people's basic needs, because countries like Venezuela and Vietnam, and you could look country by country, where they said everyone's income is guaranteed. There is a complete freeze on all rents and time payments and credit cards and car pay. All of this is frozen. You don't have to worry about it. You have income and you have basic food deliveries. That does a lot to calm the terrible apprehension. Now, we could compare that here in New York City, where 1 in 4 in the population is now hungry. Hunger is actually a big problem in New York today, because unemployment and all the promises that money would come through and didn't, and people left on their own. They were picking up literally during the height of the pandemic here in New York, 10 times as many bodies in apartments, in homes, than was average. So we see this unraveling here because there's no social organization.
Yes.
And countries that had basic social organization are managing to come through this. So I think it shows the real problems of a capitalist system based on ruthless competition, where everything is fragmented, and countries, even at a basic level, who are organizing themselves, defending their sovereignty, and mobilizing the population to understand what they're confronting.
Yeah. In this kind of pandemic, everybody out for themselves doesn't work.
No, it's actually deadly for all of us. It truly is.
So I thought we were going to do a short interview, but we did a long one. But it was a great talk. It's great to hear about all of this. So do you have any closing remarks? Would you like to tell people how to get in touch with the Sanctions Kill Coalition?
Yeah. Well, it's easy. It's sanctionskill.org. There are statements signed by thousands of people around the world. It's translated into 18 languages. That's important too. We want to be speaking to the whole world. So whether you're reading it in Bengali or Korean or Farsi, Arabic, Chinese, French and German and Spanish, it's really important. Creole, to see this in many different languages, to have downloadable material, fact sheets, very good basic material. And I want to say, working on many campaigns over the years, this has been a really cooperative and collaborative effort in so many ways. UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, is so much part of this, but it involves a whole array of organizations that, as I say, have focused in the past, from the embassy protectors and popular resistance, and Black Alliance for Peace and the Peace Council, Alliance for Global Justice, and IFCO, Pastors for Peace. I could go on. I'm going to leave out groups: the December 12th movement, the Korea No Do Toll, the International League of People's Struggles, the anyway, there are many organizations coming together. So there's sort of like a group thinking going on. How do we confront? How do we educate ourselves? Can we educate the movement as a whole in bigger ways? And can we find ways, which we've been doing in these last couple of webinars, to hear from the countries themselves? Because that's what's also blocked in the media. You don't hear from the countries impacted. So I think that's another breakthrough.
We'll go to that website, sanctionskill.org, to view the last webinar that we did, where we had high-level representative, ambassador-type representatives from 6 of the countries that have been under sanctions and have been hurt by sanctions. And we had a tremendous audience, about over 1,500 people registered. We had thousands more that watched it on YouTube and on Facebook. And you can view this whole webinar, and we'll have another one on March 31st, which I hope people come to.
May 31st.
I'm sorry,
Right.
May 31st.
May 31st. It's Sunday.
Next March too, but May 31st, and there'll be information on that website and on the UNAC website, which is unacpeace.org, and we'll be sending it out to people through all of our email lists. So please keep tuned for that. And please,
do keep tuned, because what we do collectively, we can be a powerful force if we think of ourselves and act that way.
Now more than ever, it's important that we come together, because when people come out of this period of isolation, I think the anger is going to be really manifest because of the way the rich have been gaining from this, and the poor have been hurt by this, and people will not get their jobs back and will have to pay their back rents, and this whole society has been exposed in some ways. So we need unity, because we need to come together as a progressive force, so that we can make a difference when we come out of this period. And I think we're making a difference while we're in this period now. So thank you, Sara.
Thank you so much, Joe, for the opportunity.
And we'll see you soon. Goodbye.
Great. Bye-bye.